The silence in the war room was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of a projector as it spun to life. A holographic image of Earth flickered before the assembled commanders, each face grim as they stared at the map of a planet they no longer recognized. Blue skies and green landscapes were memories now, replaced with the scarred surface of a world under siege. Alien ships loomed in every major city, casting their long shadows over the remnants of civilization. The human race was on the brink of extinction. The alien general's voice echoed in the room, a recorded broadcast from Zark himself. His voice, smooth and calculating, carried a venomous certainty that made the blood of every man in the room run cold. Humanity, he sneered, is a species incapable of fighting. You are weak, divided, and cowardly. Earth will fall under our dominion, as all the others have. It is only a matter of time. Your resistance is futile. The projection flickered out, and the room fell into an uneasy silence once again. Every man here had fought long and hard, watching friends and family fall in the wake of this relentless invasion. Every battle had ended in defeat, every plan shattered beneath the weight of alien superiority. And yet, in the depths of their desperation, they had found one thread of hope, a last-ditch weapon, one that could turn the tide. Captain Darius Hunt stood, his sharp gaze scanning the faces of the men seated before him. They were soldiers, hardened by years of war, yet even they couldn't hide the fatigue in their eyes. The weight of failure hung heavy in the air. "We are not cowards," Darius said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "We will not let this be our end. We will make them regret underestimating us." Lieutenant Roderick Graves, his second-in-command, stood beside him, arms folded, skepticism clouding his features. A seasoned officer, Graves had seen more death than any man should. His mind, once sharp and focused, had started to dull under the pressure of repeated losses. But still, he was loyal. For now. "How, Captain?" Graves asked, his voice tinged with weariness. "We've fought them at every turn. We've thrown everything at them, and still they march on. What do we have left? What can possibly turn this around?" Darius's gaze hardened as he turned toward a nearby terminal. He tapped a few keys, and the screen shifted to reveal an image. Two towering, monstrous figures. The werewolves, Kalen and Dragon. The legends of ancient warriors who had once waged war for kingdoms long forgotten, now bound by fate to serve humanity in its darkest hour. "They are our last chance," Darius said quietly, as if the name alone carried weight. "Kalen and Dragon. They are not of this world, but their strength is unmatched. Their rage, their fury. It will break the alien forces." Graves' expression faltered, doubt flickering behind his eyes. "You trust these creatures?" he asked, his voice low. "They're monsters, Darius, and we don't know the cost of unleashing them." "They are not just monsters," Darius replied, his voice steady. "They are warriors, ancient ones, bound by a code we can no longer afford to ignore. We need their strength, and they need our redemption. It's a simple bargain." The room was still, as if every man in the room was weighing the gravity of Darius's words. There was no turning back now. The alien forces had already begun their final push, and Earth's remaining defenses were crumbling. This was their last shot. "We've lost enough already," Darius said, his voice growing harder. "If we don't act now, there will be nothing left to save." A few minutes later, the hologram of Kalen and Dragon was replaced by the image of a small, secluded island off the coast of what used to be Alaska. This was where the werewolves were being held, hidden away by the resistance for fear of the very strength Darius had called upon. The island was surrounded by treacherous waters and storms, the perfect hiding place for two beings who defied the very nature of their existence. Yet, as Darius knew, they couldn't stay hidden forever. Graves crossed his arms and looked at the island's image. "You're asking me to trust them?" His voice was more quiet now, his skepticism evident. "We don't know anything about them, about their loyalty, and you're willing to gamble everything on their strength." Darius looked at Graves, his eyes narrowing. "What's the alternative, Roderick? We sit here and wait for them to destroy us? Or we take the chance that might give us a fighting chance?" Graves hesitated, staring at the island. He didn't want to admit it, but Darius was right. They had no choice. "We've already lost everything," Graves finally muttered. "What's one more gamble?" Darius's jaw clenched, and he nodded. "Prepare the team. We leave within the hour." The decision had been made. There was no turning back. The cold air of the northern seas cut through their jackets as Darius and a small team of soldiers approached the island. The boat rocked violently against the churning waves, the sky above heavy with dark clouds. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Darius's mind raced. What would they find when they reached the werewolves? Would they be allies or beasts unleashed? As the boat neared the shore, Darius spotted the dark figures standing near the edge of the island, waiting for them. The werewolves. Kalen and Dragon were imposing figures, towering over the soldiers like gods of old, their fur matted with the salt of the sea. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, the kind that belonged to hunters who had lived for centuries. The brothers stood side by side, their expressions unreadable. Kalen, the older of the two, had a regal air about him, despite the animalistic power that emanated from his every movement. Dragon, his younger brother, was raw, untamed. His eyes burned with the fire of a warrior who had been forged by battle after battle, and he looked at the human soldiers with barely concealed disdain. "Captain Darius Hunt," Kalen spoke, his voice deep and resonant. "We have been summoned." "Thank you for coming," Darius replied, his voice steady despite the unease he felt. "The situation is dire. The aliens—" "I know," Kalen interrupted, his gaze fixed on Darius. "We know, and we are here to fight. But know this, Captain. We do not fight for you. We fight for the future of this world. And in our fight, there will be no mercy." Darius nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. "We understand. We need your strength, and we'll pay whatever price you ask. But together, we can end this." Dragon stepped forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over the small group of men. "Let's not waste time with words," he growled, his voice like thunder. "The enemy is coming, and we will show them what happens when they underestimate humanity." There was no more discussion, no more hesitation. The humans and the werewolves would fight together, whether they trusted each other or not. They had no other choice. As they marched toward the heart of the island to prepare for battle, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that this alliance, fragile as it was, might be humanity's last hope. The stakes had never been higher, and the challenge before them was unlike any they had faced. The aliens had mocked them as cowards, but Darius was certain of one thing: humans were anything but cowards. They were survivors, and they would fight with everything they had left. The war for Earth had just begun. The sound of approaching alien warships reverberated across the once peaceful island, a deep, mechanical hum that sent shivers down the spines of the men who stood ready to face them. The sky had darkened, thick clouds swirling as if nature itself was preparing for the coming battle. The chill in the air had nothing to do with the wind. It was the palpable tension of a world at its breaking point. Darius Hunt stood at the forefront of the resistance, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the enemy ships hovered like vultures. Behind him, Kalen and Dragon stood tall, silent and ominous, their powerful forms casting long shadows over the soldiers preparing for the final stand. It had been hours since they'd arrived on the island, and the atmosphere had only grown heavier. The werewolves moved with an eerie, focused precision, preparing for war in ways that were both unsettling and awe-inspiring. Darius had never seen beings like them before, so ancient, so unyielding. Kalen and Dragon were not just creatures of brute force. They were strategic, their minds sharp and calculating. Still, Darius couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. "Captain, we're ready," Graves said, his voice low, eyes never leaving the distant horizon. The lieutenant's usual confidence had been replaced with a growing sense of unease. Darius nodded, but But the words that followed felt hollow. Let's make sure it counts. If we lose here, there will be nothing left to fight for. Graves didn't respond, but Darius could feel his skepticism. The man had fought by his side for years, and yet this felt different. There was a coldness in his eyes now, a distance that had only deepened since the werewolves had joined them. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and the distant hum of the alien ships intensified. It was no longer just a foreboding presence in the sky. It was a signal that the invasion was here. Darius's heart raced as he signaled his men to prepare for the worst. The werewolves were already moving, their eyes glowing with a terrifying ferocity. Kalen stepped forward, his towering frame eclipsing the smaller soldiers, his voice booming with authority. Hold your ground. They will not take this island. Not while we breathe. Dragon, who had remained mostly silent, now bared his teeth in a vicious grin. Let them come. We will feast on their remains. The alien warships descended, their colossal forms casting a dark shadow over the island. A series of brilliant flashes of light erupted in the sky as laser fire began to rain down. The soldiers scattered, returning fire, but their weapons were little match for the alien technology that had devastated entire cities across the globe. It was clear this was the beginning of the end. Darius watched as Kalen and Dragon surged forward, their monstrous forms moving like a blur of power and speed. The ground shook as they tore through the alien lines with brutal efficiency, their claws rending through metal and flesh alike. But even as the werewolves tore into the invaders, Darius's thoughts remained elsewhere. There was something off about this fight, something that didn't sit right. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being played. Something's wrong, Graves muttered, his voice barely audible as he crouched beside Darius. They're moving too easily, like it was all planned. Darius turned sharply, narrowing his eyes at the chaos unfolding around them. Graves was right. The aliens weren't fighting like they were in a losing position. Their movements, though frantic, seemed strangely coordinated. It was as if they were playing a game, baiting them into a trap. Before Darius could respond, a loud crack echoed through the battlefield. He turned to see Dragon, one of the most fearsome warriors he had ever seen, grappling with an alien warlord, his claws tearing through the creature's armored suit. But there was something in Dragon's eyes, something that sent a chill down Darius's spine. It wasn't the fury of battle. It was the cold calculation of a hunter who had just trapped his prey. "Damn it, Dragon! Get out of there!" Darius shouted, but the werewolf didn't respond. Instead, Dragon ripped the alien's helmet off, revealing the face of a familiar enemy. A human face, one Darius had seen before. It was Colonel Alexander Kor, a former ally and trusted officer in the human resistance. Graves gasped, his face pale. "Kor, how is this possible?" Darius's heart skipped a beat as the pieces began to fall into place. "It's a trap. Kor was never on our side." But it was too late. The moment Dragon tore Kor's helmet off, a hidden signal activated in the alien warlord's chest, and a blinding explosion ripped through the air. Dragon was thrown back, his massive form slamming into the ground. The soldiers around them were knocked off their feet, disoriented by the blast. Amid the chaos, Darius's mind raced. Betrayal had struck them at the core. The man who they had trusted had turned against them. Kor had been one of their own, a key figure in the Resistance's leadership. But now, it seemed he had been working with the aliens all along. The werewolves, the last hope for humanity, were now caught in a web of deceit. "Damn it, Kor!" Darius cursed, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You sold us out!" From the wreckage of the explosion, Kor emerged, his face twisted into a grin of triumph. His eyes glinted with a coldness that had not been there before. "You didn't think I would let you win, did you?" He called out to Darius, his voice filled with mockery. "I'm the one who made this happen. I'm the reason the werewolves are here, and I'm the one who will ensure the aliens win." Graves stepped forward, his gun aimed at Kor. "You traitor," he spat, his voice shaking with rage. "You've condemned us all." But Kor only laughed. It was never about you, Lieutenant. It was about the bigger picture. The aliens promised me power, true power. You were all just pawns in this game. Darius's mind spun, trying to make sense of the betrayal. Kor had always been a hard man, but this was beyond reason. You will regret this, Darius said, his voice low, barely containing the fury that burned inside him. Kor stepped closer, his gaze cold. I already have no regrets. Now, let's see how the rest of your little rebellion fares, without its leaders. Without warning, Kor pressed a button on a small device attached to his wrist, and the sound of more alien warships reverberated through the air. Darius's heart sank. The betrayal was deeper than he had ever imagined. Kor wasn't just an informant. He was a key player in the alien strategy. The final assault had begun. Graves fired at Kor, but the traitor was already ducking behind cover, his laughter ringing out as more alien reinforcements began to descend. The werewolves, disoriented by the blast and the realization of their manipulation, were now caught in the thick of the alien onslaught. Darius watched in horror as Kalen and Dragon fought valiantly, but their movements were slower now, the weight of betrayal slowing their once unstoppable momentum. We need to get out of here, Graves said, urgency creeping into his voice. Darius hesitated. The island was surrounded. They were outnumbered, and with Kor's treachery unraveling everything, survival had never felt more uncertain. But there was one thing left to do: finish the fight. We fight, Darius said, his voice cold and resolute. We fight, or we die here. But we will not surrender. Graves nodded, and together they turned toward the remaining soldiers. The battle had just become even more desperate, and trust, if it had ever existed, had been shattered. The clock was ticking. The fate of humanity was on the edge of a knife, and one thing was certain: the fight was far from over. The earth beneath Darius's boots rumbled as the alien ships blotted out the sky, their overwhelming presence suffocating the island with a cold, oppressive air. The battle had reached its crescendo. Smoke billowed from the smoldering ruins of what had once been a peaceful military stronghold, and the deafening sounds of war were punctuated by the cries of the wounded. Darius, his face smeared with dirt and blood, stood at the precipice of the final confrontation. His hands tightened around his weapon, a symbol of the last, fragile hope that humanity still had. Behind him, Kalen and Dragon stood as silent sentinels, their massive forms dwarfing the soldiers around them. The werewolves had become symbols of primal strength and ancient vengeance, but even they seemed worn, their fiery eyes dimming as the weight of their betrayal by Kor still lingered in the air. The realization that they had been manipulated by one of their own cut deeper than any alien wound. Focus, Darius snapped, his voice harsh with the exhaustion of battle. We've come too far to let this end now. Kalen's growl vibrated through the tense atmosphere. Kor is dead, he muttered, the words heavy with a promise of blood. The betrayal ends with him. Dragon's sharp gaze flicked to Darius. No more games. It's time to end this war. The final battle loomed on the horizon. The remaining forces of humanity had retreated to a rocky outcrop at the island's edge, surrounded on all sides by the alien invaders. Darius's mind churned, calculating every move, every possible outcome. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and their forces were dwindling by the second. The odds were slim, but there was no turning back now. We fight to the end, Darius said, his voice low but resolute. We either win or we die trying. Graves, who had remained by his side since the beginning, gave a brief nod, his face drawn and gaunt. We fight. A signal passed between the remaining soldiers, their unity and resolve sharpening like a blade. They would not surrender. Not when the end was so close, and not when the legacy of humanity hung in the balance. The alien ships descended further, their ominous bulk pressing down on the island like a suffocating weight. It was then that the final twist of fate would unfold. The first of the alien warlords appeared, an imposing figure draped in armor, its face obscured by a grotesque helmet. It was Kor's former superior, an alien general known as Xanthier, his presence alone enough to send a ripple of fear through the resistance. Xanthier's cruel voice reverberated across the battlefield, amplified by a strange, mechanical device. "You think you have a chance," he sneered. "Your resistance is a joke. You are nothing more than insects before a storm. Humanity has failed, and your last hope, these beasts." He gestured to the werewolves with contempt. "They are nothing compared to the might of my fleet." Darius stepped forward, his gaze locked on Xanthier, eyes blazing with fury. "You underestimate us. We don't need your permission to survive." Xanthier's laugh was cold, echoing like the death knell of 1,000 worlds. "Then let the final trial begin. Prepare for oblivion." Without warning, the skies lit up as alien bombardments began to fall. The first wave was a thunderous crash, the ground beneath them shaking as explosions tore through the landscape. Rocks and debris flew through the air, and soldiers scrambled for cover, ducking under the jagged remains of buildings that had once been strongholds. But Darius stood firm, his focus unyielding. He had come too far to let fear dictate his next move. Kalen and Dragon were already in motion, their massive forms charging headfirst into the chaos. The werewolves tore through the alien ranks with ferocious strength, their claws and fangs leaving carnage in their wake. Their primal savagery was a spectacle of blood and fury. But Darius knew they were fighting on borrowed time. As the battle raged on, more alien warships arrived, their numbers growing with each passing minute. Graves, ever the pragmatist, took a moment to glance at Darius. "We need to take down that flagship. If we don't, they'll keep coming." Darius didn't hesitate. "Agreed. We'll push through, or we die trying." With the final gambit in place, they began their charge toward the heart of the alien forces, toward Xanthier's flagship. Every step felt like an eternity. Alien fire rained down from every direction, the resistance fighting through it with grit and determination. There was no room for fear now, only action. The werewolves led the charge, cutting through the alien forces with unrelenting fury. Darius, Graves, and the remaining soldiers followed close behind, fighting for their lives. But in the midst of their battle, the tension between them and the werewolves became apparent. Every strike, every snarl, felt like it came with a price. Kor's betrayal had taken a toll. The trust that had once bound them all seemed to fracture with every blow struck against the invaders. As they approached the heart of the alien forces, Xanthier's voice boomed once more. "You think you've won? You're nothing but ants before a firestorm." With a final roar, Kalen launched himself toward the alien general, claws extended, ready to tear into the alien warlord. Dragon followed close behind, his speed and power unmatched. The two werewolves moved like one unstoppable force, tearing through the battlefield to face their true enemy. But just as they reached Xanthier, a shockwave erupted from the flagship, sending a blast of energy rippling through the battlefield. The shockwave threw Kalen and Dragon back, their bodies crashing against the ground. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the battle was lost. Darius's heart sank as he watched the two werewolves struggle to rise, the blow having weakened them more than he had anticipated. "No!" he shouted, his voice hoarse with desperation. The aliens pressed forward, their weapons ready to finish the job. But then, in an unexpected turn of fate, Darius saw a glimmer of hope. Dragon, the larger of the two werewolves, stood slowly, his bloodied form barely able to stand. Yet, his eyes burned with the fury of a beast that would not be denied. With a roar that shook the heavens, he tore into the alien general with unrelenting force, his claws rending Xanthier's armor as if it were paper. Kalen, too, joined the fray, and together, the werewolves became an unstoppable storm. Darius could hardly believe his eyes. The aliens had underestimated them, and now it was their turn to fall. Xanthier's screams echoed across the battlefield as Dragon and Kalen ripped into the general, their claws carving through his flesh with brutal precision. The alien warlord, once a symbol of invincibility, was reduced to nothing more than a broken, bloodied shell of his former self. As the general fell, a momentary silence descended upon the battlefield. The alien forces hesitated, their morale shattered by the loss of their leader. For a brief moment, it seemed that victory was within reach. But then the true test arrived. Kor, standing atop a ridge, raised his hand. A silent command passed through the alien ranks, and a wave of reinforcements surged forward, their weapons primed to eliminate the last remnants of the resistance. Not yet, Darius muttered. The battle would rage on, but the tides had turned. Victory was within their grasp, and the final confrontation had only just begun. But one thing was clear. Betrayal had been repaid in blood, and the price of freedom would be paid in full.